What happens when a hyper-advanced modern war machine is ripped out of the present and dropped onto a historical battlefield? A 21st century army is a dependent ecosystem. Without the power grids, maintenance hubs, and global satellite networks that sustain these machines, time travel creates a logistical friction that can degrade a weapon's effectiveness faster than any historical enemy. To see this friction in action, we're running two specific scenarios. First, we push a fully equipped 2026 US Armored Brigade into the sub-zero chaos of the 1944 Battle of the Bulge. Then we jump back to 1453, sending a single AH-64 Apache attack helicopter to defend the crumbling walls of Constantinople against 100,000 Ottoman soldiers. Stripping these machines of their support networks transforms a tactical slaughter into a series of unintended consequences that history was never meant to record. In December 1944, the Ardennes forest was a freezing graveyard for under-equipped American infantry. These men were caught in the path of a massive German offensive, facing superior numbers and heavy armor, with only bolt-action rifles and shallow trenches. Leading that offensive was the 6th SS Panzer Army, spearheaded by the King Tiger, a 68-ton monster that could shrug off almost any Allied anti-tank shell available at the time. The arrival of the 2026 Armored Brigade changes the math instantly. At the front are 58 M1A2 V3 Abrams tanks, protected by depleted uranium armor that makes the King Tiger's gun look like a toy. The visual range of a 1944 Tiger tank maxes out at 2,000 meters in clear weather. This diagram shows the Abrams' lethal reach. Using laser rangefinders, it accurately destroys targets from 3,500 meters away, even through fog. While German crews are blinded by the blizzard, the Abrams' thermal optics highlight the heat signatures of the Panzer engines against the frozen landscape. The 2026 Brigade can systematically dismantle an entire armored column from miles away before the German commanders even hear the engines of their attackers. But as the fighting intensifies, the 21st century tech begins to struggle against the 1940s infrastructure. Modern commanders have access to high-resolution digital maps and automated tracking of every enemy unit for 50 kilometers. But the 1944 radios are analog and voice-only. They cannot receive a single byte of that digital data. This communication gap leads to chaos. In the Ardennes, 1944, American artillery units cannot identify the massive, angular silhouettes of the modern Abrams tanks. Seeing vehicles that look like nothing in their field manuals, historical units often assume they are German secret weapons and open fire. The modern brigade successfully blunted the German spearhead and saved thousands of American lives, but it didn't end the war overnight. Historical commanders like George Patton still had to navigate the frozen terrain and execute the broad strategic maneuvers to push the German army back. In April 1453, the walls of Constantinople were all that stood between the Byzantine Empire and extinction. Outside, 100,000 Ottoman troops deployed the most advanced bronze siege cannons of the Middle Ages to slowly batter the stone fortifications into dust. Positioned above this medieval conflict is a single AH-64 Apache gunship. This pilot is completely isolated. There are no forward arming points, no fuel tankers, and no GPS satellites for guidance. Under the cover of night, the Apache uses thermal sensors to identify the massive bronze cannons and their powder magazines. Laser-guided Hellfire missiles strike with pinpoint accuracy, turning the pride of the Ottoman artillery into scrap metal in a matter of seconds. The following morning, the Ottoman army responds with the discipline that made them legendary, forming into dense, interlocking defensive squares. In 1453, this was the perfect way to stop a cavalry charge, but against 21st century munitions, it is a recipe for disaster. This diagram demonstrates the lethality of area of effect weapons against medieval formations. The Apache fires Hydra rockets into the clusters. Because the troops are so tightly packed, a single impact creates a massive casualty radius, turning the Ottomans' best tactical defense into their greatest weakness. Despite this dominance, the pilot is on a timer. Aviation fuel is burning rapidly in the thick, low-altitude air, and with the weapon pods nearly empty, there is no way to rearm. The multi-million-dollar gunship is dying with every minute it stays in the air. With the fuel gauges bottoming out and no 21st century runway in sight, the pilot climbs into the clouds and flies west. They ditch the Apache into the deep waters of the Mediterranean, intentionally sinking the technology to prevent it from falling into medieval hands. The survivors of the siege had no vocabulary for aviation or ballistics, so they interpreted the destruction through the lens of their faith. Chroniclers in Constantinople recorded the event as a celestial intervention, embedding the Iron Ghost into Orthodox texts and sparking centuries of theological debate over whether the city was saved by a miracle or a demon. The soldiers of the 2026 Brigade returned home with memories of a war that had been over for 80 years, carrying a psychological burden that no modern therapist was trained to treat. Dropping futuristic technology into the past doesn't end human conflict. It simply exploits the tactical blind spots of the era. These machines can destroy any army they face, but they are still vulnerable to the same logistical limits that have governed warfare for millennia. The outcomes were drastically different. In the 1940s, modern tech altered the bloody envoy of a world war and saved thousands of lives. In 1453, it did little more than create an incomprehensible mystery for historians to puzzle over. If you could take one modern vehicle back to change a single day in history, what would it be? Tell us your choice and the battle you'd choose in the comments below. When a machine built on modern science is removed from its own time, its presence is so disruptive that history can only record it as magic.